Thank you very much. So it's the theme was very broad, and I think the amazing range of experiences we've heard that our panelists have shared has probably triggered all sorts of ideas and thoughts, and I hope there'll be a whole lot of questions bubbling up there. Could I just make two requests? One is that when you state your name and the organisation you represent, and if you could keep your questions short and avoid lectures and speeches, then more people could come up, could have a say. So we'll open the floor now.
My name is Tony Kendall. I lived in this country for the last 40 years. I originally came from Egypt, so I'm an immigrant, and I'm proud of it. I always traveled with a British passport, so I am British. I'm married to an English wife. All my kids are English, so they are English. And I am a Muslim, and I get in touch with a lot of young, angry Muslim people, because they can see what happened to other Muslims and with a sense of injustice. And we come to the culture of blame when I elect Prime Minister that cannot reflect what I feel, or just stay around and say, well, in Gaza the war was disproportional, shouldn't happen, and he cannot get himself to say that. When I say the leader of opposition was coming to shake my hand, so I can elect him to be Prime Minister, and they turn around, and he cannot criticize any aggression in the world. You get frustrated. I met a lot of young British Muslim frustrated young men, but I could never, ever meet anybody who wants to do harm to this country. So my point is, just come to you about the culture of blame. I feel that we are blaming, the leaders who could not do anything, and bring them back to the society.
So I didn't quite. So the main point is that you feel that they've been unfairly blamed.
Yeah. Not them. I mean, what I mean, we're talking about the culture of blame, and we shouldn't have history, and we shouldn't have the culture of blame and all that. But suddenly you find yourself, you have nothing to do but to do that.
Okay. It's 100% clear, but we got a new please.
Hi, Royal Arab Institute of Archaeology. It was interesting, earlier there was a thing about the rise of violence, domestic violence, in during periods of conflict. Now it's interesting to note that women have become very violent in this country. If I see a bunch of young teenagers coming towards me, I might worry. And I wonder how much of that has got to do with the government being such a bully. Then we also heard about gang violence and how the perpetrators actually go and recruit young boys from poor areas with lack of self-esteem. Guess what? The British government is doing that by going to the poorest areas and setting up their bases for recruiting young army people. And it brings me around to a question to Mosaic, your great organization, which I hope is successful. And that is that, are you speaking to the American government, to the UK government? Because I think that imbalance was raised by one of the earlier speakers, where it seems that the word fundamentalist and terror is always saved for the minority groups, whereas, to be honest, sitting from where I'm sitting as a civilian, governments are as much of a terrorist, and as much of they need to be spoken to as well. And they're fundamentalism, that these are issues that need to be raised with governments.
Okay, there are quite a cluster of questions. Can we stick to one question at a time? It's difficult to manage. Okay, so shall we
quick reply?
Quick
reply is that we're little people doing something very small. And we're not talking to government. I mean, if the Prime Minister calls me, I will gladly have a conversation. But we're working in the neighbourhood, in a community context. One of the youth workers, who's one of our global citizen speakers, was telling me 3 weeks ago about his work with 2 of the 4 young men in July 2005 who set out to be the July 21 suicide bombers. Do you remember that 2 weeks after July 7, there were 4 other men who tried to set off bombs it was not successful. They did not blow themselves up or anyone else, and they're all serving life sentences. 3 are British young men and 1 is Somali. 2 of those British young men were living in a poor neighborhood in Ladbroke Grove, not so far from where I live, and a youth worker who worked with them told me about them, and we talked for a long time about what were those young men like, and you know what? They were ordinary young men. They were bright, they were motivated, they didn't have kind of, you know, foam coming out of their mouths, you know, and daggers, but they were radicalized into thinking that the way to make society better was to blow up a bus full of civilians. We don't agree with that.
Yeah, that's a very good point, but governments are doing that. We've already found out that 90% of deaths are now civilians. So when you're watching a government do it with a flag, you think they've got a flag and an army. I've just got me and my stone or my bomb. So this sort of argument of terror and who's the terrorist is a really fine line that I think we've got to draw between. I think governments are as much terrorists as anybody else at the moment. More so, some would argue.
I think so. I think the fact that we don't acknowledge that 1 million people have died in Iraq and we have debates about it is absurd.
4 million people have been thrown out. They've got refugees, Palestine.
Gaza or Lebanon, or I mean, it's absurd that we have to have debate the fact that you know, when America does it, it's okay, and when non-governmental actor does it, it's terrorism. It's killing civilians. If that's the different definition of terrorism, then everyone's doing it.
Okay.
Just
a
very
simple question.
Very short, well, actually very short addition to what Kat said about mothering. I was very lucky to listen to one of your mentors a few days ago. He was speaking in City Circle, and which is a Muslim organization of professionals which does very interesting other presentation, also a seminar on Bosnia, Muslim Bosnia business. And what was the most striking part of it, the practical way you tackle the problem by giving these mentors to, or letting them conduct, I think it's a year-long relationship with young people who need guidance into a proper life of jobs. It's a very practical approach too, isn't it?
Actually, Christoph, thank you, but that's a different design.
Oh, it's different movie. I'm sorry.
We're smaller.
You should merge, really, because you both come.
Okay, 2 questions. Gentleman right at the back, and then after that you.
Yeah, my name's Lloyd Yassin from Global Vision 2000, we're a think tank. In this debate, I think there's a need for another diagnosis. Specifically, there's a need to bring into the fore the military-industrial complex. That is a phenomenon, it's a reality, and the need to deconstruct it. But however, it goes deeper than that. I think we also need to look at the architecture, the financial, economic architecture post-Second World War, which basically inflicts oppression, basically, globally to not just people, Muslims or Christians or whatever, but the planet. The debate's gone beyond genocide, it's omnicide. So we need to look at the systems that has been created, and I think the money dimension, the financial elites, the cartels need to be dismantled. That hasn't even been raised at all. And I think with the crash, the financial crash, there is beginning to be a commonality of interest between rich countries and poor countries.
Yes, the theme really is, isn't it? It's women against violence and terrorism, engaging in dialogue and diplomacy. So we can't really cover the problem of the whole world in this particular debate, but I'm sure Suaad might come up with an idea for that at some stage. Gentleman in front, please.